Thanks so much, Alida, for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's get straight into this. When you think of outsourcing IT services, businesses becoming more technologically apt, it's primarily as business tries to cut costs, become more efficient. Is that the imperative of going down this route, cost cutting?
Yes. If we look at the recent survey that KPMG has conducted, one of the key things and the reason for us doing the survey was to look at the market, specifically South Africa and Africa, and our comparison against global. So one of the key things, if we look at Africa, the economies are really driving and the investment is in Africa, and global organizations are starting to invest. So what is very key and important for us is to make sure that we leverage different business models, and Africa is prepared. And if we look at technology, and what is happening with the companies, the maturity is a little bit more on technology. The organizations locally are used to outsource to specific IT vendors, but the maturity, if we look at other areas like business process, is still a challenge in Africa, specifically to take it outside of the borders of the countries. And if we look at Africa specifically and we look at the different aspects of regulatory requirements in Africa, it's still a big challenge in our environment.
Alida, it's Lindsay Williams in Cape Town. When I think of outsourcing, I think of a small company that's just set up and can't afford to open its own division in whatever sector we're talking about. But I would also have thought it's not so much a size issue, it's a skills issue. Is that the case? I mean, what type of companies are actually fully embracing outsourcing?
If we look at the industries, and it's not necessarily companies, if we look at industries where there's a large skills shortage specifically, they look on outsource to gain the skill. But like I said, South Africa, the maturity on South Africa is very tough at this stage because offshore is not a real option. But if we look at it from an industry's perspective, and we specifically look at financial services in the banking sector, we look at oil and gas, and we look at mining, they're companies that used to outsource. They also used to set up these hubs to deliver the service and get the economies of scale and the cost reduction that's required. So for us, that is really a key driver, and doesn't matter on the size of the organization because it depends what you want to outsource, where do you want to send this to, and what is the key driver for the outsource. Our local market specifically, and our survey has demonstrated that cost reduction is a key imperative. So yes, skills is a driver, but the main driver within our local market and within the African market is looking at cost reduction, especially if we look at the mining industry and the financial services industry. There's huge cost pressures at the moment.
Just picking up on the skills base that industry has access to, is there enough of a skills base to sustain a burgeoning outsource market?
There is a skills base, and we need to look on what is the specific service that you want to outsource, because the trend lately is moving from just the back office, the IT, HR, finance outsourcing and transaction processing, to more the value add, strategic side of it. So it's really moving into the core skills. If we look at specifically, if we look at mining, there's a focus on health and safety. If we look at the health sector, there's also a key focus on research and development. So depending on what is the skill need and the requirement. But what we also see from a skills perspective is that the service providers out there providing these outsourced services are now having plans in place for skills development and specifically gaining the skills and growing the skills in Africa and South Africa. So they've changed, and they have programs where they send people offshore to go on a full training program for about 3 to 4 months. Those skills then come back to the originating country, and the skills are developed, and the country then grows from a skills perspective.
Alida, how do we compare in South Africa with our overseas peers when it comes to the use of outsourcing companies? Are we way behind the curve here?
We are way behind the curve, but the market has really all of a sudden picked up in the last, I would say, 6 to 18 months. We can see a vast improvement because traditionally South Africa was very much focused and used to outsource IT. They're now focusing on looking at different delivery models, especially if we look at their growth agenda for Africa. They are now saying, in order for us to move forward, it is a key focus to make sure that we develop the skills, we create the outsourcing model, and the cost pressure is driving these, and the expansion agenda into Africa. So there's been a huge uphill in the last 6 to 18 months, like I said, on specifically outsourcing. Not necessarily on offshore yet, but really looking at outsourced services within the local countries or nearshore opportunities.
Yeah. When it comes to challenges, I mean, I've picked up here your survey findings found that change management capabilities are a key challenge. What exactly are we looking at there in terms of the challenge that's being put forward on this path?
If we look at change management specifically and what we see in these programs, the South African organizations is very much not mature enough to have extensive change management programs to ensure the success. So what we need to do is to focus on getting the change management there, and even in the change management, make sure there's a prioritization of the change initiatives. If I give you an example, you can, for example, say, okay, should I go shared service center outsource, or should I do my ERP implementation or my enterprise system? What we often see is the lack of prioritization within organizations to ensure that they manage what is the major change priority at this stage and which one will follow. Because our survey has also indicated that if we look at South Africa specifically, they tend to keep things in-house and want to try and optimize internal processes
in-house. So it's a mindset shift that we're actually looking at, and that's a very hard thing to do.
Now, and that's where change management is such a key critical success factor. And we've seen failures purely because of change management not being effectively managed in these large transformation programs, because it requires a change of the way you do business, and you need to create that service culture, because outsourcing and shared service centers focusing on the service culture, which is traditionally not the way when it's internal business unit within an organization.
Alida, let me quickly go off at a tangent, and very finally, you talk about in-house, or rather Alishia was talking about in-house, people want to develop their own in-house divisions, etc. Let's say that there's a division, it's got 20 people in it, and you're a young entrepreneur, you go around to a few of your colleagues and say, right, shall we do this? Shall we go out on our own? Is there a lot of opportunity for small outsourcing firms to do business in South Africa?
There is an opportunity if we look at the different programs that's there for small business that you can engage in. But if we look at the government grants that's available, it really focuses more on the large-scale outsourcing, because the incentives come into play based on the number of people that you're going to use in an outsource organization. So there's a huge focus. I would say on small size you can do it, but to qualify for the incentive, you're going to have to go for the medium-sized to larger scale.
On that note, let's leave it there. Alida, thanks so much for your time this afternoon. Alida Taylor is Head of Shared Services and Outsourcing Advisory Practice for South Africa and Africa at KPMG.